Hello and welcome to Hooting Mandrills. Today we will be talking about the ban and restricted announcement from 3/31. We're a little late to the game and these cards have been out for a little bit, but we thought we'd talk about it anyway. All right. So first up is Standard.
No changes. Standard is flourishing. And I don't even necessarily disagree with this ban, but I put Imagination card up here, Flourish, which similarly is not necessarily busted, but if you see it, you know the person playing it is up to no good. And that's kind of how I feel about Standard right now.
I don't actually dislike Standard at the moment. I think it's fairly okay. I'm playing a Rat Brew and I have pretty good matchups against Red and a lot of the non-tier 1 decks, but the biggest problem is Pixie for me. I can beat Domain, but Pixie's a little bit hard to out-tempo. But yeah, not just to talk about me, but you know, if you can play Rats in Standard and win some of the time, that feels pretty good, I guess.
Yeah, that's a pretty good endorsement for a format. Let's read into what they actually said. So Standard is flourishing and there are no changes to the format with this announcement. Our approach to Standard banned and restricted updates remains unchanged. We are committed to the format as untouched as possible from one rotation to the next, banning cards only if something truly problematic to the health of the format emerges. Once a year, right before rotation, we'll consider more nuanced changes with the goal of making the format as fun and dynamic as possible for the duration of the next rotation cycle. We aren't to that once a year moment yet, and both Tarkir Dragonstorm and Magic the Gathering Final Fantasy will have a chance to make their mark on Standard before the format rotates with Edge of Eternities. So basically, if they were to ban any of the cards that people are complaining about, up the beanstalk, something from the red deck, be it Monstrous Rage or Manifold Mouse, they would do it right at rotation, because those cards would have another year in Standard otherwise, but they are as committed as they possibly can be to only banning at that window for Standard, which I think sort of makes sense. They talk about the people who most want Standard bans are the people who make content in Standard daily, and their primary audience of also very entrenched Standard players. And the people that WotC wants playing Standard, or wants buying into Standard in paper, are more casual. They want Standard F&M back.
New players
newer players, people who are going to be really upset if they show up to an F&M and find out that their deck was banned out from under them.
And I totally understand that, you know, like you were kind of sold that this format lasts a while and your cards are going to stick around with you. Obviously, the cards we're talking about banning are uncommons. I don't really check the prices of Magic cards because I don't play very much paper apart from Pauper. But yeah, like I would imagine Up the Beanstalk and Monstrous Rage are a couple of bucks each, you know, so it's not the end of the world, but I really don't think that they need to be banned either. I'm not super upset about it. I can understand how it doesn't feel good to lose on turn 2 to Leyline Monstrous Rage on, you know, whatever. You could do it with the Heartfire Hero or the Scamp, but it is what it is. Aggro needs to be that fast or there can't be an aggro deck. You know, like that's the speed of the game. Like if it gets to turn 4, there's no way an aggro deck really can win anymore. You have too many tools to stop them at that point. The game's over. So like sometimes you can sneak one out occasionally. I'm not saying that you should concede at turn 4 every time if you're playing a red deck, but it's pretty close to that situation. If you don't win in the first 3 turns, the game's over. So that can be upsetting to people, obviously. And then like Up the Beanstalk, just like infinite value. You draw a card, every single card you cast in your deck, essentially. That's kind of part of the reason why you have to win on turn 2 is because if you don't, the game's not going to go in your favor. You're not going to see enough cards in a red deck. And then like they talk a little bit about Pixie later, about the town stuff. And like, you know, it's kind of like, is Standard a rock, paper, scissors? Yeah, but that's as healthy as it gets for Magic, realistically. If one deck isn't completely dominant in a format, the cards at the top of the echelon are so much more powerful that brewing is difficult in almost every format, realistically. So
yeah, and you know, people talk about the other side of the coin with with, people who find out at FNM that their deck is banned out from under them, people who just don't show up and maybe come back later, or maybe you see them later and it's like, hey, I haven't seen you around. Long it's like, oh, I didn't like Gideon standard or whatever. And those people are probably also real, but this just seems like it makes sense for how Wizards would handle the format.
I'm happy with it. I don't think that standard is in a problematic place. I think that there are brews that are possible that can pop up. There were a couple of cool decks that even did okay at Aether Drift Pro Tour with, like that green-black beans deck with the graveyard synergies, and like that was kind of cool. And like, I don't know, there's stuff out there. I think that standard is fun and I like it a lot. It feels less hostile to brew in than something like historic, which also has no changes. We'll get to that, but I mean, maybe you have a different opinion of that. You brew a lot more in historic, so.
This is also sort of the thing with any format, is that you need to play it a ton to understand what the rules of engagement are to brew in it. And
right, yeah.
Even when things are simplified a little like they are in standard,
the power level of the top cards is so much better than the regular cards. It's still a similar
but what I'm saying is, like, is it actually a problem with me if I show up in standard with, some deranged brew, it doesn't quite work, and I skulk back off to my scam mirrors? Probably, at least to some degree, it is. That if I played more standard and understood the rules of engagement better in standard, I would feel better about brewing in standard. And if I played less historic, understood less about the format and less about what I need to prepare for in sideboards, I would have less fun brewing in historic. Less fun, less success.
Right, yeah. I mean, so that's kind of like, we're both on the opposite end of that. I don't really brew in historic anymore. You don't really brew in standard anymore. I don't play any historic. You don't play any standard. So we don't see the decks. I just like have like this boogeyman idea about historic, and it makes me afraid to want to play it, right? And like, you might have a similar experience with standard, I guess.
I'm thinking about playing some standard with the new set.
Yeah, Tarkir seems cool.
Once I collect a bit more of it by drafting. So moving on, we have Pioneer, no changes. We have continued to keep a close eye on Pioneer since our last banned and restricted announcement, and we have been happy with both deck diversity and the representation of different macro archetypes in the format. There's been a healthy amount of churn in the Pioneer metagame over the last several months, with cards from the last year continuing to make a splash across several archetypes. Emberheart Challenger, Manifold Mouse, and Heartfire Hero have been a central part of aggressive decks, mirroring the standard mice package. Fear of Missing Out and Unholy Annex Ritual Chamber have seen play in Rakdos midrange shells, changing the way the deck has played and giving it a lot more closing power. Igra, Eater of All, and Scavenger's Talent have created a more combo-centric version of Jund's Sacrifice, leaving players with a strong creature combo deck they can play after the Amalia banning. The Overlord Cycle out of Duskmourn House of Horror have reshaped Enigmatic Incarnation as an archetype, letting it become the primary big deck of the format. We've also seen several smaller changes to decks with cards like Artist Talent in Izzet Phoenix and Valor's Flagship in Greasefang decks, providing a little more consistency and strength to existing decks. Despite the churn, the Pioneer metagame has remained well balanced, with a large variety of playstyles viable and no deck or archetype having a problematic win rate or play rate. The metagame continues to evolve as new decks like Dimir Bounce make their way into the format. We will continue to monitor the metagame as it develops, but at this time we are happy with the state of Pioneer and have no changes to the format. So the timing of this is a little awkward for them, as it came in the week following an arena championship where the mono red deck was 6 out of the top 8 in a field that was over 25% Rakdos midrange, the deck that you would most expect to prey on the red aggro deck. So that's something. That was honestly more, I think that was maybe more why people thought the mice might get hit in standard than anything else, was that they just seem so good in Pioneer right now.
Yeah, and so that's not a reason to ban. There are cards that are legal in Standard in decks in Pioneer that are completely unplayable in Standard, but you can somehow make these whack, plot cards in green-red or whatever work in Pioneer. I don't know. It is what it is.
Burning Tree Emissary is a hell of a Magic card.
Yeah, Burning Tree Emissary is good, so that helps. But, it's just like, I don't know. I don't play Pioneer anymore. I kind of want to, I would only play Explorer anyway, but I would consider making a couple of Pioneer decks and trying it out. I don't really think that anything needs to be banned in Pioneer either. Maybe you should ban Manifold Mouse. I'm not well enough informed to make that decision.
It also might be a different consideration in Pioneer than in
Standard. Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't played a ton of Pioneer either recently. It is sort of just a ghost town right now. There's no RCQ season in Pioneer. There was one arena championship, but other than that, it's mid-go challenges and not a ton else. So, what are we even going on or using to think about a format? And arena championships are a little awkward for making big sweeping cases, even when one deck tends to dominate them because they're so small. They have 32 players in them.
And the other factor about that is that red is the easiest deck to play, or at least perceived as the easiest deck to play by people. So it's just
you qualify
to this
in
what
limited
are you
or
play?
historic or timeless
format.
or standard, and
I can figure out how to win by swinging mice. It might be a little harder to figure out Phoenix or the familiar deck. It's just the way it is. It's way easier to play that deck, at least perceived, than to play these other decks. So I totally get playing red. Just let's try and win. That makes sense to me. And plus the mice deck's kind of fun anyway. Whatever everybody else. It's fun to be playing it. It's not necessarily fun to play against. But yeah, I have no problem. I don't know anything about Pioneer right now. I haven't played in a few months, so I can't really comment on Pioneer. But
one thing we do have opinions on with regard to Pioneer is the cards that are still not on Arena that are supposed to be Pioneer legal. And they talk a little bit about that in their Explorer section as well. Since the release of Pioneer Masters, the difference between Explorer and Pioneer has become tiny. We are continuing to monitor the Pioneer competitive metagame for cards that are not on MTG Arena. Out of 411 distinct competitive Magic Online deck lists played in March, only the following cards were missing. Not even an ounce of respect on Deathmist Raptor's name. I kind of think that Slitherhead will have his day in some sort of Goldkeeper combo deck or something.
There are a lot of new cards from the Sultai.
Yeah, that would love to be triggered for 0 mana.
Yeah, so I think that Slitherhead needs to be on Arena. I also think that Deathmist Raptor needs to be on Arena, but until some insane person queues in and plays it on MitGo, we won't see that, but I don't know.
Here are some cards that people have queued in on MitGo with that are not on Arena. Most prominent one is Kazul's Toll Collector, which is basically a Hammer Time card, like a 3-drop. For 0, attach target equipment you control to Kazul's Toll Collector. Activate this ability only as a sorcery. Okay. Then we have Warping Whale, which is 1 and a colorless, counter target sorcery. I don't really understand why that would see play in Pioneer because it doesn't counter Verdict, but if you're a deck that produces colorless mana and need to stop some board wipes, this does that. A few others. Roast is probably on the way out because there's a Roast with a dragon mode
attached to it on the Omen, yeah.
Dragonstorm. So that one's probably not a huge deal, but just a few cards that would be nice to have in situations, and then a few others that would be nice to have in situations, even if those situations are, not currently competitive on MitGo.
Yeah, I mean, if they printed Slitherhead and Deathmist Raptor onto Arena, I would try Explorer again. Your move, WotC. All right, up next is Modern. We did it. We banned Underworld Breach. Let's just talk about what they say first. To echo a point from opening of the article, December's update to the Modern ban list did a lot to breathe new life into the format. We've seen Mox Opal, Green Sun Zenith, and Faithless Looting show up in a bunch of decks to varying degrees of satisfaction from the team here at Wizards. Green Sun Zenith showing up in Yawgmoth and Amulet Titan combo decks was something we anticipated and were happy with. Faithless resource looting, breathing new life into proactive graveyard-centric decks like Hollow One is also great. However, Mox Opal teaming up with Underworld Breach to create an explosive and resilient combo deck is not something we are happy with. To give a bit more context, the last couple of months have seen a ton of experimentation with different ways to play with new tools in the format. But over time, it has become increasingly apparent that the strongest thing to do in Modern is play a Teamer Grinding Breach combo deck. The deck uses a combination of Underworld Breach and Grinding Station in conjunction with a 0-mana artifact to mill its library 3 cards at a time before winning with a card like Thassa's Oracle or Grape Shot. The deck is notoriously resistant to graveyard and artifact hate by virtue of its stability and diversity in its threats, which made it uniquely difficult to overcome in sideboarding. Between that resiliency and its explosiveness, with it being able to win as early as the first turn, we're confident it's time to send Breach back to the Underworld. With the amount of pressure that Underworld Breach put on the format, we expect the format to change a good bit with its departure, especially sideboards. Previously, we saw players committing well over half of their sideboard to try and suppress the combo, but now we're optimistic that the format can open up a bit and allow a wider range of strategies to exist. Looking past Teamer Grinding Breach, Modern looks pretty good. A bunch of different decks are showing up, with Orzhov Blink making a name for itself over the last few weeks. Aether Drift has made a major impact to the format, with Ketramos, the New Dawn, making its way into aforementioned Blink decks. Marauding Mako showing up in Hollow One decks, and Stock Up showing up in blue decks that are looking to play a longer game. We're planning on keeping an eye on the decks that were strong enough to hang despite Teamer Grinding Breach's prevalence, Boros Energy decks and Dimir Oculus decks, as well as Eldrazi variants, Amulet Titan and Orzhov Blink deck. We're watching the red-white energy variants the closest to see if reasonable counterplay emerges in the coming regional championship qualifier season, and we're excited to see what players cook up. So, yeah, obviously it was time for Underworld Breach to go in Modern. Like, it had so many different strategies that you could go down, like they say in their own admittance. You've got 3 sideboard plans and none of them work. So, yeah, I think that this is a good ban. It's still in Timeless and Historic, although without the grinding and the Mox Opal in Historic. You know, in Timeless, whatever. Timeless is busted, right?
There's one of the sieges in Dragonstorm does Wombo combo with Reach.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if anyone is trying that yet. It seems obnoxious to click through, but the blue-green siege, you pick the option that
mill every time you cast a spell,
and then you can just like strike it rich or something. Mill first yourself and then them, I think should work. Or if you can get 1 more mana, you can just mill yourself and then Grave Shot.
Right, yeah. People are less likely to do these things on Arena than Mitgo. People are committed to doing that sort of thing on Mitgo.
People play Breach in Lotus Field in Historic.
Right.
There are people who do not mind this sort of gameplay. So it's a thing that exists and could do something in the format, but it's gone in Modern. You are no longer subject to a just better Yawgmoth's will. It only took, when was Underworld Breach printed? Must have been 2019, 2020.
Or whatever.
Yeah, early Fire design. So it only took 5 years for us to realize that was going to be a problem. So we didn't get any unbans this time. You know, people were thinking maybe
Birthing Pod
or GT. People have even started talking about Deathrite Shaman.
People were buying up Shamans in anticipation. They can't unban Deathrite Shaman, okay? The card's busted. Do you think this card could be playable in Modern? I don't know.
I think it could be. It would be good in Modern.
I think it would be in every deck.
It might be a cooler Modern format with Shaman in it. Might give fair decks a little bit of a leg up. Fair black and green decks, which would be sort of interesting. I don't know
about Modern. I just imagine Deathrite Shaman would be busted as it was when it was banned. But
now, as we'll talk about when we get to Timeless, I had cut Deathrite Shaman there for a little while, and I have him back in the deck, and he's certainly good, but I think it's kind of a fun card. Gameplay with it is actually pretty good, and from my armchair observation, I'd kind of like to see Dr. S unbanned.
I love Deathrite Shaman. I love the card. I think it's awesome, but it's extremely powerful, so it has to be watched carefully, obviously. Yeah, I mean, if you want somebody with a hot take about Modern, we're probably not the people to listen to about that, but, you know, just as it happens with Arena, I think that Underworld Breach is mostly fine in the formats on Arena for now. Obviously, we'll see about the new cards from Dragonstorm and see if that makes it annoying on Arena or not, but who knows if they'd even fix it. They don't seem to care much about Historic, but I don't know. Maybe Historic is a healthy format and I'm a hater. That's entirely possible. All right, up next is Legacy, another format that we don't play, but
I like watching Legacy. I think this is sort of interesting.
So the cards that are banned are Troll of Khazad-dûm and Sowing Micah Spawn. I guess we can read what they said about it.
By the numbers, the Legacy of today does a good job of emulating a balanced format. The most played deck, Dimir Reanimator, isn't taking too large of a piece of the pie, and the next handful of decks consistently showing up aren't doing so at clips that are wildly out of bounds. The issue is that despite having several different decks, the format's slower macro archetypes like midrange and control have largely been pushed out of the metagame, as environmental pressures have wildly condensed the games. Further, player sentiment and event attendance has trended downwards. It's apparent to us that the people who love to play Legacy do not love to play today's Legacy. So we're taking a couple steps to try and improve the format. So translation.
Nobody's playing Legacy anymore.
Fewer people are playing Legacy. The people who keep Legacy afloat, the control perverts, aren't having a good time because, like Renin 6, Sowing Micah Spawn is kind of busted with Wasteland. If you need to have more than 3 lands to do your thing, you're gonna struggle. And I call them perverts, but I like playing Legacy control deck, such as it is in my limited experience playing Legacy. I think Force of Will magic is fun, actually. And there's too much pressure from the Eldrazi decks, which are very hard for the Force decks to interact with. Forcing Sowing Micah Spawn doesn't really do anything because it's a cast trigger, so you just still get double wastelanded unless you have specifically consign, and that's kind of no bueno.
Yeah, they talk later in the article about Sowing Micah Spawn's ability to go after basic lands, so it's like nothing is safe, right? Like you can just destroy their basic with the Micah Spawn, go get a wasteland, go kill their non-basic. It's hard. That, you know, like even in Legacy, that much land hate is still not the most fun environment for another player.
That much land hate that is on cast triggers too.
Yeah,
Force of Will doesn't do anything to
yeah.
interact with it. It is going to be pretty oppressive. And then also combo decks, which didn't get hit. People have said, oh, if you take away Micah Spawn, then the control decks will be better at policing things like Oops. And then others have said, no, Oops is pretty good against the control decks, actually. So we're going to just have to address that in the next BNR 3 months down the line. And we're just 3 months behind where we should be again in Legacy under these scheduled BNRs. I can see that argument. I think that the standard card BNR schedule makes more sense. Modern and Legacy sure do seem to be chafing under the scheduled BNR windows.
Yeah, I mean, those formats are so much more volatile to being completely broken. I mean, we've seen Modern be broken multiple times since Modern Horizons 3 with first Nadu and then Underworld Breach. So
energy in between with the ring. Yeah, so Modern is always horrible. Legacy is always horrible. I'm sorry to the people who play it, and you know, at least you can have solace that you're very wealthy if you're playing this in paper. No, I'm just kidding, but they also banned Troll of Khazad-dûm, which is interesting. Troll is sort of one of those cards that gets hit in Legacy for the sins of other cards. In this case, it's the sins of multiple other cards. It's sort of like Ragavan and Dreadhorde Arcanist and Psychic Frog in dying for the sins of Daze, but it's also sort of dying for the sins of Entomb and Reanimate.
But they want to keep those decks together.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I don't know. I've heard people saying that it's a bad ban and that it's not going to work.
I've heard conflicting things. Some people say, you know, this is a good ban. This was a real linchpin piece face to those Dimir decks. Some people have said that those decks can switch to Ent or Oliphant in that spot. But Ent and Oliphant are worse on the battlefield than Troll is, mostly, and makes those decks more susceptible to Wasteland, it seems to me.
Right, because you can't fetch the basic swamp with those guys.
Yeah, because I don't think those decks can play a basic mountain or basic forest.
That wouldn't be very useful.
It makes the deck less good at being a Wasteland deck, I think, because sometimes these decks can just play Wasteland, cycle Troll, get Underground Sea, and they have both their colors, and that's not true anymore. So your sort of land-light Wasteland deck is a little bit more fragile, I think, in those circumstances. We'll see, of course. I don't play enough Legacy to have really strong opinions, and...
Yeah, so people have already taken a step back from Legacy, but maybe this will bring some people back into being interested in it. I don't know.
I think Legacy is cool. Again, I don't play enough to really have a strong opinion on whether Oops will be okay now. I certainly sympathize with the people who don't like it and would rather play Control, Tempo, Fair Legacy, and maybe in 3 months they'll need to hit Balustrade Spy or Undercity Informant or Dread Return to try and get those under control, but we'll see. Vintage. No changes. They talk a lot, but I think this is actually an interesting one. Certainly if you play another format where they restrict instead of ban, like Timeless. There are no changes to Vintage with this announcement, but there was much discussion about one card and its place in Vintage. That card is Lurrus of the Dream Den. So when I watch Vintage, I go back and forth wildly between thinking, you know, Lurrus would be a really fun, well-designed card if it had just been printed in a Vintage Horizon set. And like, no, this is absolutely not okay. You buy it off Lotus, it gets Lotus back. What is going on in this format? But I think I am more on the first side that Lurrus helps the fairer decks hang and means that you can expect to get vintaged maybe one game out of a given match, but there's more play and more stuff to be doing in the format because Lurrus is in it.
There's so much unfair stuff in Vintage. Like, the whole point is that you need to be doing unfair things at all times while playing this format, right? So it's just like, this is the kind of place where Lurrus is okay, and that's kind of how I feel about Timeless as well, where it's like, sure, I mean, go for it. If you want to play Lurrus in Timeless, it's probably fine. You want to play Lurrus in Vintage, it's probably fine. Maybe we need to start looking at Historic for Lurrus, but that's really my interpretation of it.
So they go on to say, last August we restricted Urza's Saga for a few reasons, one of which was the hope that it would reduce Lurrus's prevalence in the format by weakening decks looking to utilize a toolbox of cheap artifacts. While Lurrus Saga decks are essentially gone and the diversity of Lurrus decks has increased, the metagame share of the card Lurrus of the Dream Den has also increased over time. Lurrus was banned before for 9 months in 2020 to 2021 under the original companion rule. It was the only power level ban that Vintage had seen in many decades, but felt necessary at the time. Once the companion rule was updated, we unbanned Lurrus in the Vintage spirit of keeping as many cards as possible legal. At the time, we said it was an experiment and one we'd be willing to revert if necessary. We had the discussion about whether this was still true. The short answer is yes. If Lurrus becomes a significant enough metagame problem, we will ban it. At the moment, however, we are not close to that threshold. That threshold is, of course, fuzzy, but we'd need to see a much staler metagame concentrated around just a few Lurrus builds and an even higher metagame share for Lurrus. There are cards banned in Vintage, dexterity cards, subgame cards, and attraction cards, and so on. They are banned in all formats for tournament logistics issues. While the companion mechanic is not, in air quotes, scare quotes, much of a logistical issue, it has a unique interaction with Vintage and the restricted list. Because of this, banning in Vintage is on the table for a card with the companion mechanic. We won't let the format stagnate to preserve a clarity of a quote-unquote rule that already has exceptions. So we'll continue keeping an eye on things with Lurrus, both in tournaments and with player sentiment. Overall, the Vintage metagame looks healthy, based on recent results we've seen.
So what are the results that they're talking about? Just Magic Online? Are there occasional
Magic Online challenges?
Occasional tournaments of Vintage? Or like in-person play that they can collect some data from, I imagine?
You actually have to be you don't have to be as wealthy to play Vintage as Legacy.
On Miko especially.
Well, on MitGo, Vintage is cheaper than Standard. I'd play a ton if I was on MitGo, probably, or I'd play a decent amount of Vintage anyway. In Paper, they have a lot of very proxy-friendly events. There are a few big Vintage tournaments a year. I think NYSE is coming up soon. They have a big Vintage tournament at Eternal Weekend, or all the Eternal Weekends have a big Vintage tournament. But yeah, that and MitGo challenges are what they're referring to.
Okay.
And yeah, Luris is sort of interesting in that. I've said a few times that I think they do see Companion as more of a tournament logistics problem than a actual balance problem, in contrast to their player base, and that's why cards like Luris and Gigantha are still legal and historic. Luris more so. Like they said, you can't actually restrict Luris. It doesn't do anything. This is true of other things that were pretty dominant in Vintage before Luris showed up, like Tinker for Bolas's Citadel. You would never play more than one Bolas's Citadel. Tinker is already restricted. There is not a tool through restriction to make your format not about this if players commit to doing it.
Right. I mean, I guess you could restrict it, make a new rule saying you can't put it in your Companion slot, but...
banned as Commander in a Vintage constructed format. That'll go over super well.
Yeah, people would be really happy about that. No, I'm not suggesting that. I'm just there's not really a good way to deal with it. It's kind of all or nothing.
And they're thinking about it. It's interesting to have this insight about cards like this where restriction isn't a tool. If you like Vintage or if you like Timeless, having these bird-in trails to augur from may come in handy down the road. Moving on. This is the big one.
This is the one that matters. This is the one that we have to discuss.
Yeah, so Pauper, Basking Brood Scale, banned. Kuldotha Rebirth, banned. Deadly Dispute, banned. Prophetic Prism, unbanned. High Tide, unbanned. They go into, Gavin in a video and an article that covers a lot of the same points, goes into a lot of detail on this. The sort of detail that I think we wish we got in other formats, where they're cagier about what sort of play rate is a problem, they're cagier about numbers, and
they're all honest as
what
well about
what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, they're honest as well about the fact that the unbans may not remain unbanned. I think they said July 30th.
Trial unban up until the next BNR window, which will be in either end of June or end of July. I think end of June, because they're every 3 months.
Okay, yeah, so we'll get to High Tide when we get to it, but yeah, let's talk about...
It's also something that you can do more in a format like Pauper, because this another thing they talk about. The barrier to entry is low. It is cheap to buy into Pauper, and you will not be financially devastated if you buy into High Tide. And
yeah, $80 is what the deck is going to cost with the Merchant Scrolls, but something around there. But yeah, High Tide does increase the cost of Pauper for sure if you want to play that deck. And we'll talk about High Tide fully. Let's talk about the bans first, though. So I guess let's just go in order. Basking Brood Scale with the Sadistic Glee combo, they find that it's too much of the meta. It's winning too much, I think, is what they're kind of concerned with. I think it's a powerful deck. I'm not actually sure that this is the right move. I think that combo is a lot easier to break up with things like Snuff Out, Thraben Charm, just like kill spells, all sorts of stuff. Obviously, you can protect with Snakeskin Veil and Duress and stuff, but that combo is break-upable in some ways. So yes, you have to commit sideboard cards to it to break up the Brood Scale combo, but I'm not certain that this was the right move. We bought into Brood Scale. I'm not sweating the costs of the deck that we lost. It's fine. We'll financially recover. That's not the reason why I'm upset. We have a lot of the meta, so it is what it is. But I don't know. I'm not completely sold that this was the right call. What are your thoughts on Brood Scale, Sam?
So the version of Brood Scale that I built and that we bought into is a little more combo-centric and has less of a fair plan than the
Writhing Chrysalis Wildfire one.
Yeah, the one that's most popular up to the banning. I haven't played as much with that version, and it's possible that it's just a little too good on too many axes, so can't speak to that as much. I do kind of like these sort of creature-y combo decks, but I think the stats might have borne out on this, and, Brood Scale is just sort of a card that you look at and say, oh, this goes infinite with something. Like, literally when it was spoiled. Where I first saw it was someone posting it as it was spoiled in the Discord and saying, this goes infinite with something, right? And
it goes infinite with a few things.
Yeah,
and it probably would with more cards in the future.
And yeah, people like looked at it. It's like, oh, it goes infinite with Blade of the Blood Chief in Modern. And is there a Pauper one? It's like, oh, yeah, definitely. There's going to be, I think I said at the time, there's going to be some aura from 25 years ago that
does the effect to make it go
yeah,
infinite. And it turns out, 27 years ago, sadistically, in fact, existed. So yeah, there it is. So I mean, I'm fine with it, the ban. I'm not like tilted over it. I don't really care. I'm not sure that it was, I think this one could go either way. I don't know that it was necessary, but I get why they did it.
I mean, this is sort of just the active hand of format curation, and sometimes that means deciding that a deck just shouldn't exist, and for potentially good or ill, but they decided that for Brood Scale. But in general, Pauper being so actively curated seems good for it.
I'm fine with
but
the bans.
if you're a Brood Scale gamer, Brood Scale main, you're gonna really miss this deck. I am sorry.
I just think that there are cards that beat it that also have other modalities, like Thraben Charm or Snuff Out has other applications, right? The cards that beat High Tide have other applications, but we'll get to it. Anyway, let's talk about Kodotha Rebirth being banned. So the reason they banned it essentially is the win rate was like 70% of game one and like 53% of other games.
I think it was a 53% overall match win rate. So that probably means it is unfavored in both sideboard games, but not
But
by
people were
enough.
sideboarding. I think the main reason Kodotha Rebirth is banned is because 90% of the field in Mitgo was playing it.
Yeah, there are a lot of people on Mitgo who are grinding red Pauper leagues, essentially like if you've ever encountered gold farmers in
World of Warcraft or
in a MMO or something. It is a deck that you can get very cheap, and you can play a lot of leagues really fast, and you can win enough of them to make enough play points to make some money off of the Mitgo internal economy. Though having that polarized a game one win rate is a real thing. There are always going to be decks in old formats that are like that. Dredge is very like that in Vintage. I'm not as sure about Dredge in Legacy, but I assume Dredge in Modern is very similar to that when it's good. But you don't want just the most played deck to be a deck that is super polarized around sideboard games, and you don't want the sort of basic entry-level red aggro deck to be that polarized, I don't think.
Yeah, I don't know that the deck is actually broken or whatever, but I understand that, that high of a game one win rate is pretty serious. Every deck has 4 Weather the Storms in the sideboard if it's green to try and deal with it, or, whatever, life gain of some kind has to be a part of your sideboard plan to beat it, and that's a good reason to ban a card. I'm also not tilted. I'm not really tilted about anything except maybe High Tide, but that also has a caveat that they probably are going to reban it anyway. But one thing at a time. Kodotha Rebirth Bushwhacker thing is pretty potent and pretty good, so I understand why they banned it. I think that it's more of like a Mitgo reasoning than anything else, but yeah, it's fine. I don't think that they need this card.
I bet there are still going to be decks in Pauper that have that sort of like high game one and much lower sideboard game win rate, just because it is an old format. I bet that's true of Pauper Dredge, not having numbers for it in front
I think
of
that's
me.
got to be true for Dredge and Affinity, right?
Probably, yeah.
Where the hate pieces are so powerful against you that if somebody's not main decking Graveyard Hate, your Dredge deck probably wins a lot on game one, or not main decking Artifact Hate. Affinity probably wins a lot on game one, but it's hard to win a game of Magic with one land. And as we make this transition, Deadly Dispute.
Yeah, well, so having decks like that is part of the cost of doing business for having an old,
Eternal
powerful
format,
with some powerful things you have access to. But you don't want the default red aggro deck to be like that. I think this is a good ban, actually. I think I agree with their reasoning. But yeah, Deadly Dispute. This one is...
Pauper's Ancestral Recall.
Yes.
This makes sense to me. This card was very powerful. It does everything. It draws cards, it fixes, it costs 1 mana, essentially. It can ramp you for next turn if you don't want to use the treasure immediately. The treasure is an artifact for affinity. There's a million reasons why this card is super powerful. I understand banning it. You still have access to this effect. There are, Reckoner's Bargain, the map one, and the one from Modern Horizons. You can still sacrifice an artifact and draw 2 cards. You just don't get a treasure token.
Yeah, there are enough variants of this that you have access to this effect. They are worse than it by a significant enough amount, but still good enough in Pauper, where this effect is so powerful. This makes a lot of sense to me.
I also support them not banning Ichor Wellspring. I get it that that's 4 cards for 2, but I think that it's okay. I think that drawing a lot of cards is part of Pauper, and that's what makes Affinity fun, is that you draw 1 million cards. And it's the only reason why the deck is good. If you couldn't draw 1 million cards at Affinity, it wouldn't be that good. Probably, I think.
I think I agree with that assessment. And so now unbans. The unbanned Prophetic Prism, which has been banned in Pauper for a while. Fixer artifact, ETB, draw a card. Mana's kind of bad in Pauper. There are things like Tron that are legal that this helps fix for. It is significantly better than Energy Refractor in that regard because it fixes for just 1 in tap rather than 2.
Right, so there's a reason for Tron to play both, and having both makes Tron a lot more powerful. Tron was really not very playable up until this unbanning. I think we have to wait and see the power level of Tron, and if they're gonna leave High Tide, they need to leave Prism.
Tron, I imagine,
because Tron
also
is one of the few decks that can deal with High Tide.
Tron, I would imagine, also is one of the decks that had a pretty poor matchup against Mono Red, and that deck getting worse could help it too.
Yeah, that's true. That brings Tron into the mix. Tron, you hate the big mana decks, but in Pauper, I think that it's mostly fine. I think that Tron is okay.
I probably don't hate Tron that much in Pauper.
Yeah, it's not like Green Devotion.
Yeah, you're casting what? Some draft common Eldrazi from MH3 probably, or Syncopate. Oh, it's not Syncopate. It's the one that scries.
I think you just play Control and then one shot with the uncounterable Fireball or whatever.
I'm not mad about Tron potentially being good in.
Yeah, I'm fine with
Pauper.
it too, and I think it's okay. I think that Prophetic Prism is going to be good in Tron. It's going to be good in Affinity. I don't mind it. I think we're going to need more time to see this card be broken, but I think that it has been okay to be unbanned for a while. I think it's fine. Obviously, we'll probably eat our words, and Prophetic Prism will be so busted that, Tron will be the only playable deck, but that's not going to be the case because High Tide is completely meta warping, in my opinion. From what I've seen, this deck wins on turn 4 every time. You can maybe disrupt it, but this is where it comes in. They're talking about you need sideboard cards. If you're playing a red deck, I think you should play 4 Hydroblast, 4 Red Elemental Blast now. I could just be seeing good players play this deck and win a lot, but because winning on turn 4 is hard in Pauper. The red deck obviously can do it.
A lot of your mana is pretty tapped.
Yeah.
You're not mono red.
But even just looking through my Slivers deck, it's possible to win on turn 4. It is, obviously, but you need a pretty specific set of cards to make that thing happen like that. The red deck also, you need, I think probably to win on turn 4 without Kodotha Rebirth, you need multiple Tomb Raiders and Galv Blast / Lightning Bolts. You need to have quite a few things going on, and it has to be all, High Tide isn't going to do much against you, but I don't know. The High Tide wins on turn 4 every game, in my opinion. I think it can win on turn 3 too, but that you might brick, you might fail on turn 3. But I think on turn 4, from what I've seen, High Tide is gonna win the game. And it takes 30 fucking minutes too, so that must be really irritating for Mitgo players. But yeah, the Splice to Arcane stuff really busted with High Tide. Like, they talk about Snap with Archaeomancer. I don't really think that's the best way to do it. I think that the Andrea Mangucci High Tide deck with the Splice to Arcane Merchant Scroll, like, that's probably the best way to play it. You know, some ways they could keep High Tide is maybe they could make that card that counters every card of the same name Pauper legal to deal with the replicate things, to stop it at the end or to stop it on the Giga Drows. With Giga Drows, like, the only decks that really can do anything against Giga Drows are Tron and Fairies.
I haven't actually seen a ton of High Tide. How does it win? Is there a Storm card still legal in Pauper?
A replicate card. It's the same.
That makes sense. Because every Storm card other than Weather the Storm is banned in Pauper, but if you can produce a zillion mana, you can replicate a card for a zillion, and that works.
Stream of Thought is the card that wins the game in High Tide, which is 1 blue sorcery. Target player puts the top 4 cards of their library into their graveyard. You shuffle up to 4 cards from your graveyard into your library. Replicate 2 blue. So you essentially do this 12 or 13 times, make them mill out their whole library. It's the same way that Turbo Fog wins. So, like, there's that, and then there's the other replicate card is Giga Drows. So Giga Drows is 1 blue, replicate 1 blue, tap target permanent. So you just, if your opponent is playing blue, or I suppose red too, like I said, I think you really need to side in 8 cards against High Tide if you ever want a chance of beating it. I don't know if people want to play it. I think they will because of how powerful it is. Like, High Tide is the new aggro deck.
People do seem to like High Tide and be interested in playing it. I think there will be some interest. I think it's a pet deck for a lot of people, and they're excited for it to be unbanned, and that may be unpleasant for others.
I just think that the reasoning that they banned these other cards does apply to High Tide, and we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm just watching really good players play it, and it just looks super powerful, but, like, it just seems like this deck wins on turn 4 every time, and, like, even if you are trying to hold up counter magic, it doesn't necessarily matter, which I think is pretty demoralizing, and, like, having to sideboard so many cards to beat it, I think is really irritating. But we'll see. Maybe they just reban it, and I won't be so tilted. You know, like, obviously I'm not the combo player, so I don't usually reach for decks like that. I just think that High Tide is too powerful with all of the tools you have, and I think that if you don't want to ban High Tide, you have to ban, like, 3 cards to make the deck a little more fair, being like Giga Drows and the arcane spell that untaps Psychic Puppetry. Yeah, so Psychic Puppetry is the Splice to Arcane card.
What's the arcane card that you splice to?
Peer Through the Depths, our arcane card. So Peer Through the Depths lets you look at the top 5 cards of your library, reveal an instant or sorcery card from among them, and put it into your hand, put the rest on the bottom of your library. And the other one is...
Splice to Arcane being relevant.
Reach Through the Mists. Draw a card, Arcane.
So making Splice to Arcane relevant is a crime in and of itself. There are still a few Monarch and Initiative cards legal in Pauper, I suppose.
But those cards don't break the format.
I'm just saying, these are silly mechanics. But
yeah, well, Pauper has silly mechanics, and that's fine. I don't care about there being silly mechanics in Pauper. And, like, you know, some arbitrary arcane cards from Kamigawa suddenly becoming super powerful is silly, but, like, it's just, like, I don't think that the deck is very interactable. Maybe if they just ban Giga Drows, then maybe just, like, has to, like, go boldly without anything.
The
that
hand
it
of
can do.
Nadu reaches down into the Pauper format, bearing a Shuko in the guise of Splice to Arcane and High Tide.
Yeah, I don't know. From what I've seen, the deck seems really, really powerful. And, like, if we're mad about aggro winning on turn 4, we should be equally mad about combo winning on turn 4, especially when it's, like, Basking Broodscale is much more susceptible to things like creature destruction and, you know, all that sort of stuff. There are other sideboard hate pieces that, like, drain your opponent for 1 every time they create a token. Like, there's stuff to do against Broodscale. High Tide is just, like, watch your opponent opponent. Like, and I don't even like have a problem with Balustrade Spy and Pauper. I don't have a problem with Cycle Storm. I think that those are good decks and that they can win, but like those decks seem a lot more likely to brick. I mean, maybe they could ban Merchant Scroll and Giga Drowse and that would be enough, but like why not just ban High Tide, right? Like I don't know. I think it's going to be a problem, but I've been wrong about plenty of shit, so who knows?
Tune in 3 months where we will either have been right or wrong about this DNR. Next, Alchemy. No changes. Alchemy is a silly format. It is a small standard with cards that are of a power level of like a Pioneer Horizons, if such a thing existed, jammed into it. But I want to talk about it because there are a few cards here that are relevant for Historic and Timeless as well. No changes. Rebalances play an important role in the format as we dial in cards with more frequent changes. Our last round of rebalance changes looks to have been very successful at pulling life gain and heist decks within the bounds for the format. Golden Sidekick is playing a more supporting role in the life gain deck, and Impetuous Lootmonger is no longer the payoff for playing your opponent's cards that it once was. Selesnya Rabbits remains a powerful option for players, even with the additional mana cost added to Buxton. Buxton is like a Convoke commander card. Golden Sidekick is the one that I want to talk about of these. I had a couple Golden Sidekicks in my Timeless Orzhov Necroscam deck. It pitches both white and black, which is relevant, and when it was a 2/2, it was a pretty effective thing to just be there when the dust settles or you reach a auto assault. It just chips in the air, it grows stuff, even if your hand is full of juggernauts that you've been peddled, or you have one creature in your hand and starts pumping it. It was pretty good, but at 1/3, it's just not really interesting in Timeless anymore. It doesn't present a clock. It might be more interesting in Historic, where the third point of toughness matters, because more of the red removal is shocks in Historic. So
right,
maybe
Fatal Push isn't as good in Historic anymore, and the Galvanic only has 2 energy on its own.
Yeah, so maybe Golden Sidekick is still Historic playable. It's gone in Timeless. I have gone crawling back to Deathrite Shaman, but you know, Deathrite Shaman's pretty good. So
you shouldn't be too sad about having to put Deathrite Shaman in your deck.
Moving on, new cards from Alchemy Aether Drift are also making an impact in the format. Noctimun Shines Again has been a powerful addition to cheap creature decks, while Trackhand Trainer and Ornate Imitations added a splashy new Simic Exhaust archetype to the metagame. We are watching the Grixis Chorus deck, which is showing an impressive win rate since we rebalanced Hymn to the Ages and Ribald Shanty, and may make further changes to it in the future. The rebalances to Hymn to the Ages and Ribald Shanty are insane to me, and I've seen the Grixis Chorus package in Historic and Timeless, and these cards are just really, really good. Ribald Shanty is just shock for creature or planeswalker that the second one is, even just on its own, the second one is a bolt and it just keeps going up. It's really good with any sort of spell recursion, you know, Jar Soul or Snapcaster Mage or Dreadhorde Arcanist. And Hymn to the Ages is just an absurd magic card at 2 mana.
These cards look busted to me.
Yeah.
I mean,
we were talking about stock up the other day, and you were asking if it sees
why it doesn't
if
you could just play Hymn to the Ages.
I was like, well, yeah, because this card is here and this card is wild. It seems kind of busted in Historic and Timeless and at 2 mana. And
bring Orcish Bowmaster back to Historic. No cap. No, I don't know. That's probably a bad idea. But if people are allowed to play this shit, they should be punished. This is not an actual take. I don't know anything about this format. I'm reading these cards for the very first time. I'm upset.
Like, Alchemy has pretty consistently had busted draw cards in it. I think nerfed Orcish Bowmasters saw a fair bit of play in sideboards in Alchemy when Rusko was legal in the format, because it was just a way to get them when they're Midnight Clock wheels. But Hymn to the Ages is a wild magic card. It maybe doesn't have as many things just cranking it over the top in Alchemy, but it would surprise me if this card was okay. I mean, it surprised me if anything is okay in Alchemy.
I mean, who cares about Alchemy?
Yeah,
but like the thing about it is, like, the data you have is from people who are just queuing into it who have no idea what the game is yet, right? Like, for the most part.
I think a lot of people get funneled into Alchemy.
Or people who are trying to grind Mythic 250 or whatever.
It's people who are being funneled into it with starter decks because it is the first format alphabetically, and it's what like the starter decks are actually legal in, because they're not legal in Standard anymore, or at least some of them aren't. There are cards that are not legal in Standard that are in the color challenge starter decks that always stay legal in Alchemy, and then it's sharks who are trying to prey on those people. And it's not a great situation. It's not really a format that should exist. I think that we would all be happier if Wizards were more honest about Alchemy cards being plants for Historic and Brawl, but
right, yeah, it's mostly for Brawl. They don't care about Historic, but still.
Anyway, we expect to continue to leverage rebalances to keep the metagame fresh and balanced. Expect another update during Alchemy Tarkir's release. We are excited about the variety and competitiveness in Alchemy right now, and feel the time is right to run an Arena Championship qualifier weekend with the format this coming May. Did not read that part, did not know about that.
Probably shouldn't, but you're gonna, so cool.
Maybe I will be playing some Alchemy or thinking about the format at least a little if there's an ACQ in it coming up. We'll see though. Moving on. Historic, no changes. Historic continues to be our most diverse format in MTG Arena, with no deck above 5% of the overall play rate. The format has stayed mostly the same since our last update. One notable change is the rise of a powerful Boros Enchantments deck featuring many Duskborn House of Horror cards like Sheltered by Ghosts and Shard Mage's Rescue. This deck is now competing with other powerful archetypes like Energy Aggro, Izzet Wizards, 5-color Omniscience, and monocolored decks like Elves and Goblins. We are continuing to monitor the strength and speed of the Energy Aggro deck. We have rebalanced a few cards already and will continue to do so if this powerful deck starts to take up too much of the format. So this is interesting to me for a couple of reasons. Again, we are auguring from bird entrails here, but Modern and Legacy players talk about feeling like they're 3 months behind under the scheduled BNRs, and I'm wondering if this is actually 3 months behind, because I was talking about the Boros Enchantments deck, Boros Auras, 3 months ago in the last BNR, and they say it has arisen since then.
Right, I mean...
Like, I didn't see the future. People were already playing it on the ladder.
Yeah, and this is the deck where Luris is most effective in Historic, right?
Well,
or
it's one of the good Energy is also a Luris deck.
Sure.
Usually. I guess you might call that one Mardu Sacrifice. That is one of the other things about this, is that I see Elves and Goblins barely ever.
I can't imagine those are very good decks.
5-color Omniscience is a deck that I never see. I assume it means like a woodland combo deck, and I assume it's very played in best of 1, but I never see it in best of 3. So I am assuming that
this data is all about the best of 1.
This data is heavily weighted by best of 1.
Because yeah, I could see Elves or Goblins being more preferable to a best of 1 gamer where you don't have to deal with sideboards, but I can't imagine you would want to play best of 3 with either of those decks. I don't know, because I don't play Historic, but...
One deck that a lot of people do want to play best of 3 with that isn't mentioned at all in this is the various Sorin variants. Sorin Elenda variants. Some of them are Orzhov, some of them are Abzan for Malevolent Rumble. And
seems good.
Some of them are Esper for Frog, and
also seems good.
Diviner of Fates. There are a lot of versions. A lot. This deck is very highly played. It's definitely more than 5% of the
best of 3 ladder.
Best of 3 ladder. I played it in literally my last 3 matches in the last 8 Historic ACQ that I played in, which was not a good time for me playing Hollow One. And someone who qualified in that qualifier posted on Twitter that their last 5 matches of day 2 were in the mirror with this deck. It is very highly played.
So it goes back to like Wizards using weird data to make decisions about this format. I understand that best of 1 is a big deal for you guys and the playership of your game. A lot of people are playing best of 1 for time reasons or just whatever. They don't want to deal with the sideboarding element of this, but it's ridiculous. Like, this is clearly the most powerful deck.
Elenda on turn 3 has also got to be pretty good in best of 1. This is another thing that makes me wonder, are we actually factually 3 months behind. Not 3 months behind in the sense that smart people can look at the format and see the next big thing coming.
But anyone with eyes would know that.
Yeah.
Like anyone who's playing the format would know that Sheltered by Ghosts and Shard Mage's Rescue are a big deal for this, enchantment stack. And then the fact that they don't even mention Sorin Alenda when you're saying that this ACQ is just completely Sorin Alenda decks is absurd.
Or at least it was completely Sorin Alenda decks by the time I was 3-1. The winner's metagame seems to have been very heavily Sorin Alenda.
But isn't that what we look for when we're talking about bans?
Yeah, so we are. The point is they're looking at ladder numbers, which seem to be heavily influenced by a volume of best of one, and seem to be heavily influenced by lower ranks and less competitive parts of the ladder to make these claims. And they don't really bear out when you look at the format as someone who plays it pretty regularly. And that's a shame.
But also Historic is like kind of the place, if you played Magic 10 years ago or whatever, and you want to get back into it and, there's this free client arena, I'll just play and my cards are going to last forever if I buy wild cards for Historic. Obviously the metagame can shift and your cards can become less powerful and all this stuff, but it's a lot more appealing if you're a casual person who isn't like playing all the time to play Historic than something like even Standard is a long time, but it's not forever. And like if you are casual and like keeping up with the wild cards in Standard is a lot. The meta can just like wildly shift to like, the whole Unholy Annex thing being pretty much unplayable in Standard now. I've seen some people still trying it, doing the green-black thing, but I don't think it's going very well for them.
Yeah, and Historic could be a better sort of old folks' home for some of these nostalgic cards as well. There's a lot of pressure put onto it by the more powerful strategies or a lot of the power outliers from MH3. It's a pretty good place to play Snapcaster Mage if that's what you're into. It's not as good a place to play Dark Confidant or Tarmogoyf.
I don't know where you're supposed to play Tarmogoyf for Bob. I mean, they printed a double Bob in Bloomborough and nobody plays that, so sorry, Bob.
Yeah, and Sorin is really, really good, and that is another thing, that A, their data is weird, and B, I do not really enjoy the play patterns of the Sorin deck. I think it's a lot of the things they talk about in other formats in their bannings, or the things that people complain about in the cards they want banned in Standard, that there are a lot of strategies on which it's really oppressive.
Do people play it in Timeless? Do they Dark Ritual into it?
Yep.
Or
you can Dark Ritual Sorin Alenda in Timeless. A lot of Scam variants play that. I tend to beat the piss out of Scam mirrors, so I think it is not as good a thing to be doing as the Guide, Pride, Shadowheart thing that I prefer. It's also a common thing to see in Belcher decks because they're also Dark Ritual decks a lot of the time.
Oh, okay, cool. I mean, not cool. Don't play Belcher, you fucking... No, I'm just kidding. It's fine. Play whatever you want.
That is another thing about Historic and thinking that they could take a more active hand on it because they have Timeless as a farm up state for these cards
that
to
run
around and be free in. Sorin is really good. Saint Alenda is a very powerful thing to put into play on turn 3 with a Planeswalker also hanging around. I'm going to have a hot take here that I don't know that Oko would be the best 3-mana Planeswalker in Historic if he were legal.
Sorin might be better than
Sorin,
Oko.
in the current context of the format, might be better.
I mean, that's sort of the thing, right? Like, control doesn't work in most formats anymore. It's just like not exactly how the game works anymore. There aren't really strict control decks in many formats. Kind of need the force of will to make control work. I mean, the game is too fast in all formats, even Standard. The only good counterspell in Standard is No More Lies, or is that it? Blue-white one?
Yeah, that's No More Lies.
Yeah, that's really the only good counterspell. Everything else is too expensive. I mean, there's that double blue that counters a creature that also could bounce. That people barely play that one though, because like those decks don't want to be that blue.
Dispelling Exhale from Dragonstorm seems alright if you can behold consistently, but
oh, that one, yeah. There's also the one that like costs 1 less to cast for your big dudes. That could be potentially something, but it's a later game counterspell. I mean, don't get me wrong, in my Rats deck, I play 4 Disdainful Stroke in the board, and in many matchups, I'm just overjoyed to bring it in. It's great against the green-black Phyrexian Obliterator. I have a great matchup with Rats against that deck. It's great against Domain. It's good against everything except Mono Red, really. So I'm not saying that no counter spell is good, but I'm not playing a control strategy. I just don't want you to board wipe me or to play Phyrexian Obliterator or an Overlord.
You know, going back to where we got to this tangent from, every time I look at a historic brew and it's like, damn, I wish I could play Oko on this. It is a brew that I am looking at. It is something that needs the help. And I'm not saying unban Oko.
You're just saying ban Sorin.
Well, I
or
could
consider it.
Maybe think about this card and what it's doing to the format. I could see it Alchemy nerfed to 4 mana, honestly. Maybe 2 black.
That would do something for sure.
That would definitely put the deck under more pressure and bring it more in line. I don't know. I wish they'd take a more active hand in historic.
For sure.
There are a lot of reasons why they could. Sort of like Pauper, Arena's not that hard to keep up with historic as a free-to-play player on Arena, if that's what you want to do, like you were talking about a little bit. And I think that they are doing things that are probably correct for standard in historic, but doing it with worse, more questionable data for one, and I don't think it makes as much sense for the format. So I wish they'd handle it different.
Well, there's a billion tournaments for standard, so like
yeah,
the data is not just
yes.
best of one nonsense that they're taking all their data from for standard.
They are not relying on the best of one bronze ladder to make decisions for standard.
And thankfully, they didn't ban Leyline of Resonance in best of 3. I get it, whatever. It could be really annoying in best of 1. It's a flip of a coin. Everybody's playing Leyline of Resonance best of 1 standard. I get it. That's annoying. But like in best of 3, it's not even that good. A good percentage of the red decks don't even play it. So
Timeless, no changes. Quickly to wrap it up. Largest addition to Timeless has been Chrome Mox, adding a fast mana ramp option at the cost of a card in your hand. That is what Chrome Mox does. The card saw a lot of play when it was released with Aether Drift, but has since been on the decline as not all decks benefit from this effect. I think this is largely true. I would not mind seeing Chrome Mox restricted because the decks that want to play 4 are like Belcher, and
boo.
The deck that I play definitely doesn't want to play 4 because there are a lot of times when it is just so much worse than a land would be. But I think the number I want to play is more than 0. So if you would just make the choice for me and have me play 1, I would not necessarily mind, because sometimes it is really good when you're trying to get to Necro or you have a full grip off Necro to play it, but when you're trying to play a fair game plan, a card is a real cost. I think they are probably right about this, though. I think Chrome Mox is probably fine. And then they say Chrome Mox and Bright Glass Gear Hulk have helped push a Birthing Ritual deck to become one of the top performing options in the format. Early data suggests that this archetype is holding its own against Show and Tell, Charbelcher, and Energy Aggro. It will be exciting to see if it can maintain that performance as counterplays are established in MTG Arena's strongest format. I've played against this deck. I think it's a good thing to have in the format. I think Timeless, I like being the Wild West like this. I am pretty happy with Timeless.
That's how, I don't play very much Timeless either, but it's cool to just have a format where the broken stuff is fine. And like, if they want to do a lot more, you know, like qualifiers and stuff in Timeless, maybe they have to take a more serious look at it. But I think it being the Wild West is kind of fun as things stand.
I went 3-3 in the last Timeless qualifier. I had a lot of fun playing in it. I fired 2 bullets in the play-in. One, I think I went like 1-1, and then the second I 4-0'd to make the actual qualifier. But cool. I think Timeless is a relatively balanced format. You know, it has, like we talked about, rules of engagement that you have to respect, but I
so
think,
does standard.
Yeah,
so
I think it has cool things to do, and it isn't too narrow in what the best decks are. I think that this format is a good Wild West. I think Luris is a good influence in Timeless. A lot of the things I really don't like to see in Historic are fine in Timeless. You know, I kind of think that I'm going to do another hot take for the people who got into Magic a few years earlier than I did and say that something that I said in the Aether Drift Alchemy set review, that Oko is too slow and too fair for Timeless. Ajani is just a better Planeswalker than Oko is in the deck that plays him. But I think the Sorin Alenda thing is fine in Timeless. There's a lot more efficient removal that answers it better. Like, even if you can Dark Ritual it out, I think think that you come to this format to do
degenerate things.
Yeah, do horrible things to people and have them try to do horrible things to you.
It's in the terms and conditions. You agreed to this nonsense, so it's fine, you know? And the same could be said for any format, right? Like, people complaining about, you know, Heartfire Hero in Standard with the red decks of Monstrous Rage and complain about Beanstalk in Standard, you know, they're valid. It sucks to just, like, face those decks over and over again and lose to them over and over again with your cool brew, and, you know, you're cursing this person for playing the best decks in the format. That's not reasonable, right? Like, if you want to play Magic competitively, you gotta play the best cards, and each format has better cards and worse cards, and sometimes you can eke through with a rat deck in Standard and feel really fun about it, but sometimes you can't. So it is what it is, you know?
Sometimes you can, and my version of Scam is not particularly popular on the Timeless ladder. I think it's very, very good. Like,
I mean, it must be. You keep winning things, so like it has to be decent, unless you're just like playing a bad deck and are so good that your bad deck is making it somehow. Like, that doesn't sound right to me. Obviously, you could win more. But
I think I am decent at Magic. I think I pilot the deck pretty well, but you know, Dark Ritual Necro is in fact a powerful thing to be doing. That's not player skill necessarily.
Right, the same way that winning on turn 2 with, you know, like Scamp into Monstrous Rage and a Leyline. Wow, you really got to be skilled to do that. No, I mean, it's obvious, but just because it's obvious doesn't mean it's not good. And you know, play the good shit. Like,
well,
that's
what I'm getting at is that, like, yeah, play the good. If you understand the rules of engagement in these formats and what you actually need to do, you can find an angle to doing something different. You know, before the Pixie deck was one of the big 3 rock paper scissors decks in Standard, it was a brew, and Beanstalk was not printed into Standard to be
it was for a draft.
It was printed to be a draft uncommon, and was not thought about for constructed play at all. And you know, that's why it's busted. We're getting a little philosophical at the end of 2 hours of however long.
Who knows, after editing it could be much shorter, but
let's hope so. But
I'll do my best.
We're getting a little philosophical at the end here, not really talking about the BNR, but as I look to the vast wasteland that is Timeless, I feel a sense of hope about brewing in many formats.
Absolutely. You know, and that's really why at the end of all of this, pretty much everything they did, I agree with. I obviously think Historic might need a couple of tweaks. I do think that High Tide is negative for the Pauper format overall, and that's really my closing thoughts, is that fuck High Tide, ban Luris in Historic, ban Sorin in Historic, or make it cost 4, I don't know, something like that.
Mr. Verhey, my format yearns for freedom.
Well, hopefully you guys enjoyed this, even if it's a little late and a little long, but
due to illness and other complications, we didn't get the set review done for Dragonstorm. It's not fun if the takes aren't hot, but yeah, we'll talk to you soon about something. Maybe
Alchemy,
Dragonstorm. Maybe we'll figure out a gameplay video to put out between now and then. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, subscribe. Let us know what you would do in your favorite format given the reins.